to at least put two of these in your car, please. Alright, so, this guy took us on this long chase. He says that it's not because he has any warrants, he doesn't have anything in the vehicle.
The story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where doors are left unlocked and children ride their bikes freely down the streets. To outsiders, it was a peaceful home, filled with family laughter and routines. But behind closed doors, a dark secret was festering, one that would shock the entire community when it finally came to light. It started, as many tragedies do, with a small suspicion, something that didn't quite sit right with neighbors and friends. Whispers, subtle and fleeting, about a family tension that no one could quite define. The mother of the family, a hardworking woman, dedicated her life to raising her children, ensuring that her home was a safe space for them. Her daughter, bright and full of promise, was a young woman navigating the delicate balance between school, work, and family obligations. And her son, the one who would ultimately shatter their lives, seemed normal on the surface, but there were signs, small and almost imperceptible, of a growing darkness within him. The first cracks in the facade were barely noticeable. Arguments, sharp words, moments of tension that could have been dismissed as typical sibling rivalry. But there was something different about this young man. He had a temper that simmered beneath the surface, unpredictable and intense. And over time, that simmering anger would evolve into something far more sinister. Neighbors would later describe the family as private, perhaps even reclusive at times, but no one imagined the horror that was unfolding behind the walls of that seemingly ordinary home. The mother, devoted to keeping peace, tried to mediate when conflicts arose, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Her daughter, trusting and loving, confided in no one about the fear she began to feel, unsure of whether anyone would believe her or whether her own words might provoke further harm. It all came to a head on a day that began like any other. The household had its usual rhythm: breakfast, the sound of the television in the background, the children preparing for school and work. But behind closed doors, the tension that had been building over months reached a breaking point. It was the son's actions that transformed the ordinary into the horrifying. The details that later emerged in court were more chilling than anyone could have imagined. What initially seemed like a domestic disturbance unfolded into a story of cold calculation and ruthless betrayal. The son, someone who had been loved, trusted, and protected, had crossed a line so unimaginable that even those closest to him could barely comprehend it. His actions were not impulsive, they were deliberate. Every step, every decision, carefully orchestrated. The crimes he committed were beyond comprehension, a twisted plan executed with shocking precision. His sister, the person who had grown up alongside him, became one of the first victims of this horrifying scheme. Her trust shattered, her sense of safety obliterated. But the horror didn't stop there. The mother, the heart of the family, the one who had devoted her life to nurturing and protecting her children, was also ensnared in the web of his cruelty. The very person who had loved him unconditionally faced the unimaginable. Law enforcement and the community were left reeling. Shock was the first reaction, disbelief the second. How could someone so close commit such unspeakable acts? The audacity of it all made people question everything they thought they knew about trust, family, and the human capacity for evil. Investigators arrived at the scene to confusion. Initial reports were vague, fragments of a story that seemed almost impossible to believe. But as they meticulously pieced together the evidence, the horrifying truth began to take shape. Interviews revealed small, telling details. Witness accounts painted a picture of a person who had manipulated those around him, using their trust as a weapon. Physical evidence confirmed the worst fears. This was no accident, no fleeting lapse of judgment. This was a carefully plotted betrayal. The psychology behind it was complex and disturbing. Experts would later describe a level of premeditation that few could imagine, a calculated cruelty that seemed almost mechanical. Every decision, every step, appeared to serve a dark purpose. Community members struggled to reconcile the image of the boy they had known with the actions he had taken. Friends, neighbors, even extended family were left questioning how someone could plan and execute such horrors without any outward signs. In court, the full scope of his actions shocked the nation. The evidence painted a chilling narrative of manipulation, deceit, and violence. The methodical nature of his crimes forced even seasoned investigators to pause, as if the scale of betrayal was too vast to fully grasp. And yet, amidst the horror, one fact stood starkly clear. This was not a momentary lapse. This was not a crime of passion. This was a premeditated act by someone who knew exactly what he was doing and the pain he would inflict. The community would take years to process what happened that day. The echoes of betrayal lingered in every conversation, in every whispered rumor, in every cautious glance within the family. Trust had been shattered in a way that could never fully be repaired. Even now, as the court transcripts reveal the full timeline, the story remains a haunting reminder. The people we trust the most each day brought a new layer of fear, a fresh reminder of what had been done to her. When law enforcement arrived, she had to recount her experiences repeatedly. Every retelling was a trial, an attempt to preserve the truth, to make sure her words could withstand scrutiny in court. Yet, even in the midst of trauma, there was courage. Her bravery was undeniable. To face the horrors she had endured, to speak them aloud, to make the unimaginable real for others. This was strength few could comprehend. Fear had become her constant companion. It clung to her in every shadow, every corner of the home that had once been a sanctuary. The environment that should have offered comfort and safety had transformed into a cage, where every step, every glance, every sound was a potential trigger. Survival required strategy. Each day was a careful calculation. How to move without provoking him, how to avoid drawing attention, how to exist in a world turned upside down by betrayal. Even the smallest mistake could have devastating consequences. Her testimony would later become one of the pillars of justice, but at that moment, it was merely an act of survival, a way to assert some control over a life that had been violently disrupted. The mother's world, too, had been shattered. A woman who had spent years shielding and nurturing her children now faced the unthinkable truth. One of those children had inflicted the ultimate harm on the very people she had vowed to protect. Her sorrow was immense, a weight carried silently even as she prepared to testify. Yet within that grief was resilience. Her determination to seek justice for her family, despite the betrayal, despite the pain, was nothing short of remarkable. In court, her voice carried both heartbreak and authority. She spoke not only of the acts themselves, but of the profound emotional devastation that followed. Each word reflected a combination of love lost and trust betrayed. She painted a picture of life under constant threat, where even moments of calm were shadowed by the anticipation of danger. She described the confusion, the terror, and the slow erosion of normalcy that had once defined their home. Her testimony exposed the depth of the betrayal. It revealed how someone so intimately connected could transform from a child of the family into a figure of fear. The emotional impact extended far beyond the physical harm. It was the destruction of a world built on love, safety, and trust. The mother's perspective added yet another layer. She spoke of the struggle to reconcile maternal instincts with the unimaginable truth. How does a parent process the fact that their own child could commit such acts? How does one continue to protect and guide when trust has been shattered so thoroughly? Together, the sisters' and mother's testimonies created a vivid, harrowing narrative. They documented the fear, the betrayal, and the courage required to survive, ensuring that the court and the world understood the full scope of the crimes. Even years later, the memory of those days remained vivid. Fear, survival, sorrow, and resilience, all intertwined in a story that no one could forget. Their voices, once trembling with trauma, became a testament to human endurance, a record of suffering transformed into a call for justice. Law enforcement faced a case that was as complex as it was disturbing. At first glance, the son's story seemed coherent. He had woven a narrative that might have appeared plausible, a tapestry of half-truths and carefully placed lies. To an untrained eye, it could have seemed convincing. But investigators were not fooled. Years of experience had taught them to see through deception, to recognize the subtle cracks in a story meant to mislead. Every pause, every inconsistency, every detail that didn't quite add up became a thread they could follow. Digital footprints offered a window into the truth. Messages, location data, and online activity contradicted his account at nearly every turn. It became clear that the version of events he offered was not just misleading, it was a deliberate attempt to obscure the reality of his actions. Forensic evidence added another layer. Items collected from the scene, traces of biological material, fingerprints, and other tangible clues began to converge, corroborating what witnesses and survivors had described. The picture forming was undeniable. The son was responsible for crimes that had shattered a family and terrorized a community. The victims themselves became crucial to unraveling the truth. The sisters' accounts, recounted multiple times, provided not only a chronology, but also a window into the fear and manipulation she had endured. Her bravery in revisiting trauma again and again was instrumental, a stark contrast to the cold calculation of the perpetrator. The mother's testimony was equally vital. Her words conveyed the emotional devastation of a parent forced to confront the unimaginable, that a child she had nurtured could commit such acts against the very people she loved most. Her sorrow and resilience gave the case an emotional weight that physical evidence alone could never convey. As the investigation unfolded, prosecutors began assembling a case that would leave no detail unexamined. Every piece of evidence, from the forensic to the testimonial, was meticulously documented. Patterns of behavior, timelines of events, and the manipulations designed to obscure the truth were laid bare, forming a narrative that would ultimately be presented in court. The community, meanwhile, struggled to reconcile the crime with the family they had thought they knew. Shock, disbelief, and grief reverberated through neighborhoods, workplaces, and schools. Yet, amid the confusion and horror, support for the victims emerged. People rallied around the sister and mother, offering solidarity, comfort, and a sense of shared outrage. Even as the legal machinery moved forward, the emotional aftermath remained palpable. Investigators, prosecutors, and community members alike understood that justice would not erase the trauma. But uncovering the truth, exposing deception, and holding the perpetrator accountable were crucial steps in restoring some measure of order to a world turned chaotic by betrayal. Each hearing, each piece of evidence presented, reinforced a single reality. The crimes were deliberate, the betrayals deep, and the impact devastating. Yet the persistence of law enforcement and the courage of the victims ensured that the darkness would not remain hidden forever. During the trial, the courtroom transformed into a theater of horror, a space where the unimaginable events of the past were laid bare. Every detail of the crime was scrutinized, examined, and presented with painstaking care. The prosecution constructed a timeline so precise that it left little room for doubt. From the planning stages to the execution and eventual aftermath, every step was documented, every movement mapped. Witnesses took the stand, each adding their piece to the puzzle. Neighbors described unusual activity, sounds that, at the time, seemed minor, but now revealed the meticulous orchestration of the crime. Friends recounted subtle warning signs, small inconsistencies in the perpetrator's stories, and the emotional changes that hinted at the darkness beneath. Family members faced the most daunting task: to testify about intimate horrors while battling the weight of personal trauma. Their words were heavy with pain, yet necessary to bring the full truth to light. Among them, the sister's testimony stood out. Her presence alone was a statement of resilience. Facing the person who had inflicted the deepest betrayal, she spoke with a clarity that cut through the tension of the courtroom. She recounted the fear that had defined her every day, the manipulation, the calculated ways her brother had controlled her environment, her choices, and even her emotions. Each moment of terror, once private and hidden, was now exposed under the unflinching scrutiny of law and public attention. Her testimony was not a frantic or emotional outburst. It was measured, deliberate, and precise. Yet beneath the composure lay the raw weight of someone who had survived the unimaginable. Every detail she shared painted a portrait of life under constant threat, a reality few could fully comprehend. Forensic evidence corroborated her words. Every account, every description of abuse, every tactic of manipulation was supported by physical proof. The convergence of testimonial and tangible evidence made the prosecution's case undeniable. Other witnesses bolstered her story. Experts in psychology explained the effects of prolonged fear and manipulation on victims, lending context to her experiences. Investigators described the methods used to conceal the crimes, highlighting the deliberate nature of each act and the chilling foresight with which it had been carried out. The courtroom became a place where the full horror of betrayal was quantified. The audience, from jurors to observers, was forced to confront not just the crimes themselves, but the psychological devastation inflicted on those closest to the perpetrator. The trial was a study in contrasts, meticulous evidence meeting raw human emotion. It was a reminder that crime is not just a sequence of acts, but a ripple of trauma that affects victims, families, and even entire communities. Through it all, the sister's courage shone brightest. Speaking of fear and manipulation without flinching, she helped transform private terror into public testimony. Her voice carried not only the weight of the past, but the promise of accountability. By the time her testimony concluded, the courtroom had become more than a site for legal proceedings. It had become a testament to survival, a record of horror that could not be denied, and a foundation for justice. Every word, every corroborated detail, brought the community closer to understanding the depth of the crime and the magnitude of the betrayal. It was an unsettling, unforgettable display of truth confronting deception, courage facing cruelty, and justice finally moving forward. The mother's testimony added an additional layer of gravity to the proceedings. She described the shock and betrayal she experienced upon realizing the truth, the profound sadness of seeing her family torn apart, and the courage it took to confront the perpetrator in a legal setting. Her narrative provided context, showing not just the mechanics of the crime, but the human cost, the emotional and psychological devastation inflicted upon those who had once trusted him implicitly. The defense attempted to cast doubt, offering explanations that ranged from minimization to outright denial. They sought to challenge the credibility of the victims and to suggest alternative interpretations of the evidence. But the prosecution, through careful presentation and compelling testimony, systematically dismantled each argument. The jury was shown the patterns of behavior, the deliberate actions, and the premeditated nature of the crime. Throughout the trial, the community watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. The story had captured national attention, in part because it challenged basic assumptions about trust, family, and safety. How could a sibling, someone bound by blood and shared history, commit acts so heinous? How could a mother's instinct to protect be rendered powerless in the face of such calculated betrayal? Ultimately, the jury was presented with a clear choice. The evidence was overwhelming, the narratives compelling, and the premeditation evident. After hours of deliberation, they returned with a verdict that reflected both the gravity of the crime and the clarity of the evidence. Guilty. Each charge, meticulously documented and argued, was upheld. Justice, though delayed, had been served. In the aftermath of the trial, the community grappled with the implications. Questions about family dynamics, mental health. For the victims, the journey was far from over. Healing from such trauma is neither linear nor simple. Therapy, support networks, and ongoing vigilance became essential components of moving forward. The sister, in particular, faced the challenge of reclaiming her sense of safety, redefining her personal boundaries, and rebuilding trust in the world around her. The mother, too, had to navigate the complicated emotions of grief, betrayal, and resilience. This case also served as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and intervention. Often, victims remain silent out of fear, shame, or a desire to protect others. Community awareness, accessible resources, and supportive law enforcement can make the difference between a tragedy that remains hidden and one that is brought to justice. In telling this story, it is essential to remember the humanity of the victims. They are not defined solely by the crimes committed against them. They are individuals who faced unimaginable circumstances, who displayed courage in the face of terror, and who ultimately ensured that accountability was achieved. Their voices, preserved through testimony and reporting, stand as a testament to resilience, survival, and the pursuit of justice. While the perpetrator will serve time for his actions, the broader implications of this case continue to resonate. It challenges assumptions about familial trust, exposes the potential for manipulation within domestic environments, and underscores the critical role of community, law enforcement, and legal systems in protecting the vulnerable. The story of this family, while tragic, is also a story of courage and perseverance. It reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, truth and justice can prevail. It compels us to listen, to intervene when warning signs appear, and to support those who find themselves trapped in situations they cannot navigate alone. As the legal proceedings concluded and sentences were handed down, the survivors began the slow process of reclaiming their lives. Therapy sessions, support from friends and community members, and the simple acts of daily living became acts of courage. Every step forward was a testament to their strength, resilience, and determination to live beyond the shadow of the crime. In the quiet moments, when the world seemed to settle, the memories of betrayal lingered. But alongside them, there was also a sense of empowerment, of reclaiming agency, and of ensuring that the lessons of this case would not be forgotten. The narrative, while painful, serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the potential darkness that can exist even within seemingly ordinary families, and the power of courage, truth, and justice to prevail. The community, though shaken, emerged with a deeper understanding of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and support for those who might otherwise suffer in silence. Law enforcement, prosecutors, and support networks were reminded of the critical role they play in bringing hidden crimes to light and in supporting victims through unimaginable trauma. Ultimately, this is a story of survival amidst betrayal, of courage in the face of unimaginable acts, and of the enduring pursuit of justice. It is a story that reminds us that even in the most ordinary of settings, extraordinary resilience can be found, and that the truth, no matter how painful, must always be uncovered and acknowledged.